Hi, I'm Curtis Karwacki. It's Memorial Day 2018, and I'm going to be doing a intro and a lesson on how to sit with your cello, how your setup should be, and things of that nature also. So what we're going to do is we're going to go about the basics. Don't get distracted by my dog. So, first things first, what I know about this topic comes from a lifetime of experience and good teachers. Also, I have an extra added perspective on it because I've also taken Alexander technique classes, which are, I think, pivotal for lots of performing musicians. I was playing with lots of tension, and Alexander technique cleaned up my playing and basically saved my career and made my ability to keep my muscles efficient and loose and relaxed much better. It allows me to extend my career and play in a more healthy way. So, first things first, you have to basically accept the situation. Sometimes you don't have a good chair. Sometimes you have a chair that's too small. Sometimes you have chairs that are, I don't know, chairs can't be too high unless you're a very small person, because then you could run into other problems, and there are unique circumstances. Everybody's body is different, set up differently. So first thing you want to do, and this is what I learned from Alexander technique. This is a technique that I learned. So every good cello teacher worth his money is going to tell you, sit on the front of the chair, sit on the edge of the chair. That's pretty much true, but everybody needs to find their own thing. If you're a really tall person sitting in a really little chair, it's fine to be all the way back in it probably. But you want to find what works for you in that chair. So you should practice literally just sitting by itself. So you want to stand up, have shoulder width apart, relaxed arms, and you want to be able to just settle into your seat loosely and relaxed. And keep your knees and your shoulder at about shoulder width. Keep your feet about the same, maybe a little wider. It depends. But we're just going to practice sitting for a minute or two. So you stand up again, you're like, okay, let me get a better try at it. And here's an important thing. You don't want to sit on your tailbone. Most people have, especially modern day people who are more sedentary than they've ever been, at least in the United States, they crouch over like this. So what you really want to be focusing on, your sit bones are actually in the upper part of your upper legs. Like, you want to be aiming for like just below your hips, upper leg, and you want to roll your hips and your pelvis forward, so that way you accentuate the natural S-curve shape of your spine. And you just want to relax here for a minute. You want your shoulders rolled back. Lots of cello players specifically get into the habit of slowly creeping forward, and they play like this, and it looks like Frankenstein. And even when you're in the very high positions of the cello, you should be very relaxed. If you can, it depends on how high up the fingerboard. Even this is the end of my fingerboard. Do you see? This is the end of my fingerboard. Do you see how my arm and my shoulder do not need to be up here. They can still be relaxed and loose. It definitely, you want to keep this angle, and it requires your elbow to be up, but your shoulder doesn't have to be overdoing it. And the same thing with the bow arm. All right. And the same thing with the bow arm. You never need this. You just want your shoulder loose and back. And I'll get into more things like that as we go on. But there's a lot of nuance and intricacies to just sitting with the instrument correctly. So People will always tell you sit on the edge of the chair. This is a good chair. It's just right. And let me talk about your knees for a second. So, this is perfect. This chair is perfect for me. This is my practice chair, and that's why it's just right. My knees are at a downward angle. You don't want your knees up here doing this, because you're just gonna hit your bow with your knee or your elbow, and that's a problem with small chairs. And you have to just learn how to play in small chairs sometimes, because the place that you go to, you don't want to carry a chair around with you everywhere. So general seating, but the main thing is to practice just sitting in the chair, rolling your pelvis forward so that your spine is basically neutral. And you want to just release all tension from your shoulders when you're playing, at least before you start playing. And that's essentially the sitting part. So now set up and with the instrument. And pin length. So typically the rule that most teachers teach you is that you want the top of the peg box or the head of the instrument at your chin. When I just set up and pull my cello out, it's actually a little too high. So that's more like it. It depends on how long your torso is also. So everybody needs to make fine adjustments, but there's just some general principles that usually work for 90% of people. People with handicaps or different issues have to find unique ways to work. So as you can see, you set up with the cello, and you want the cello to be straight down. I'm not always perfect at this. Actually, I want this out a little bit longer. It's hard to know unless you're sitting directly in front of a mirror. So sometimes this, if you don't have a mirror, you just sit there and you put your head behind it, and then this, and then you know you just have to move a couple degrees to the left. You want it positioned just under about at the middle of your rib cage, just under your heart. This is the back of the cello, this bout here connecting to the fingerboard in the neck. Actually, see, I'm just trying to be so conscious about this right now. Now I want to pull my end pin out another ½ inch after taking it in. Yeah, that feels right to me. When you're sitting down, you kind of like this C string to be able to kind of tickle your earlobe. Make sure you use your sit bones. Always remember, sit on your sit bones. Don't let your spine roll backwards and crouch over and do this. And then you end up rolling your shoulders forward to get more strength. You have the most strength in this neutral position with your S on your spine. Ari. Sorry. Ari, what are you doing? So don't ever let this happen. Get a different chair. Find a different way to sit in it. Do something. You can see that I naturally position myself more towards the middle of the seat. That's just kind of what naturally happened in this situation. But if I'd probably move up a little bit because I would be a little bit self-critical about it. So, the right arm, as we've talked about, shoulders rolled back, S shape in the spine. You want to be just thinking about your lower back pushing forward. So that way it moves your torso forward for a strong center. Keep your feet flat, grounded. There's some room for this. You want to get used to having a little bit of sway. But the right arm. So this is a bow hold. You want to have your thumb curved Some people like to hold the bow like this, at this point on the stick. I put my thumb in the frog. I've done that for the past few years. It's gotten me more strength and power. And some people you want to have just flexibility in your fingers. That's the most important thing about a bow hold, is just being able to let them relax and react to the situation while keeping the bow straight. This first finger, you want it curved, and some people hold it at this knuckle. Sometimes that's fine. I hold it kind of looser. I go to this knuckle, but there's a situation for both. You should have all different types of bow hold at your arsenal. It's just a situational thing. Your bow should be used to anything. So when you're playing at the tip, your bow hold looks more like a violin player typically. So, and then when you're playing at the frog, you want to release this finger, and that's almost more like a good bass player's French hold. So you release. And here's basically the gist of how the right arm works. It's a big figure 8. And so watch my elbow. It does a figure 8. So on a down bow, I release and drop my elbow, so that way gravity does the job for me. Now by the time I've gotten to the tip, I have to put more weight in, but you can see that my elbow has gone up to compensate, and use this index finger here to press in. Watch my elbow drop. Come back up. Yeah. Just like that. And then if you kind of get it moving faster, it does the figure 8. And so now, you notice that when I'm playing the C string, I kind of have a different thing. So your cello, this is another important thing that I like to teach all my students, because I've spent time thinking up this thesis myself a little bit. So the cello, we have the advantage of having the end pin, and we have all these different angles that we can play with. The cello has an axis which you can rotate on, and it makes the job of your left hand and your right hand easier. So when you're on a C string, it's good to have, it's good to sit forward, like lean forward practically. Because look it gives me prime access to the C string, and then it also, at this angle, whereas over here, this flattens out my fingers. This is more of an A string sitting angle. This gives me extra leverage to the C string. You know, it just gives me grab on the C string specific. As I move to the other strings, you can see that I do something different. I actually take my knee over here on the bout and move the A string over to me. So this is more of a A string angle. See, the cello's in a completely different place. You see that? I'm bringing the cello to my bow arm, so my bow arm doesn't have to do anything extravagant or eccentric. So, and you can coordinate this into the way you play your pieces. So if you have something that's starting out on the lower end of the cello and then goes other places, you just change the angle while you're practicing slowly and get used to it, and then it'll kind of translate naturally into your playing. This is also beneficial. See that? How I'm not really moving my left hand, but I'm sitting forward and sitting back a little bit and just bringing the cello string to my left hand. You can do both of these in tandem at the same time because they work sympathetically. It's a good ecosystem for both hands to have this flexibility. Also, as far as creating big sounds and creating your full sound, what you want to do is get used to just this. Back and forth. So you kind of want to be able to rock with the beat of whatever you're playing. Because watch what happens when I use that in my favor. Push out more sound by using my body movement as well as my arm. You're playing the cello with your body, not just your fingers and your arms and your hands. You have to use your whole self. Okay, now let's talk about just left hand setup. Now that we've gone over this axis, A string angle is you take your knee and you kind of put this over here. C string angle, you just roll over this way and you sit up. So that's a great piece opening for C string angle. So that's Lalo Concerto in D minor. So now let's look at a piece that's really good for A string angle. Song Concerto number 1. Yeah. I haven't practiced much lately, but that is like an A string angle. You're more focused on more focused on the A string, so you rolled it over. So this is the stock playing position that most cello players get into, is this A string angle. But my elbow hits my hip when I have like long forearms. So my elbow hits my hip if I just stay in this position. So I have to sit up if I want good access to the C string. So I think this is helpful, but it all depends on your body type. Everybody's shaped a little bit differently. But just introducing this concept of this axis to roll with is something that I find that I uniquely teach well. Left hand setup, you always want your left hand fingers to be curved unless you're playing bar chords, which you have to flatten out. So there's that. There's different schools of thought about your elbow angle and being square versus being more like this. This is more of a violin player thing, is to come from back here. Look at my third and fourth fingers are flailing off, so that's not useful. So I think the better practice model is to definitely be doing this. Also, this will make your fingers be flat. That's it. That's like a violin thing. You want your fingers evenly spaced, your bow evenly, just like your fingers on your bow, really. You want them evenly distributing the load of work to be done. So the left hand setup, let's see if this works. you always want a straight line from your wrist to your elbow. So if I'm up here, from down here, I still have a straight line. So that's like a half position, stretch position thing. So at the bottom of the cello, it looks pretty uniform, except with the angle of going up the neck and the fingerboard, you have a situation where this does kind of eventually come out, but that's just a situation of the angle. You can bring your elbow forward to get your pinky working in upper positions. It's good to practice getting your pinky involved in upper positions, but you'll find that it has to kind of just land flat unless it has a half step. So that's not always great. You want to try to practice getting your fingers to do all of them curved like this. So even me catching little faults in my own technique. So now I just caught myself, because I'm being super extra conscious about it, leaning forward because I was looking at my fingers and being very careful, and I started craning my neck, and I started doing this type of cello playing, which is not usually the most useful type of cello playing. It's too pressy. So you still, even in upper positions, and you're keeping your fingers curved, you have to counter that shoulder rolling forward. So even in the upper positions of the cello, now here's another basic concept of left-hand cello playing. You don't want to get your fingers flying up. This just makes more work and it makes you less accurate. You need to keep your fingers as close to the fingerboard as possible. So an efficiency of motion. So I was just working on that little lick there. So my fingers are at a maximum of like 2 or 3 millimeters from the strings, and that's what I was looking for. I didn't do it a second ago because now I'm paying attention to it though. And notice how I lean this way to the A string when I go to the A string. Myself leaning forward again. You always, you're never quite done. You don't always get it. It's like you have to always pay attention to these things. Once your ideas and your mind are open to the fact that these things play a factor in your playing, the rolling forward, the shoulders too high, the lazy thing where you're sitting on your tailbone, and there's a bunch of problems that come with this. So don't ever sit lazy. It's when you sit down to play, you're at work. This is your job. So you have to have a good grasp on being prepared and finding the neutral position that has the most kinetic use of your weight, your arms, and your fingers. So I hope that this was useful. I think that just about covers everything about sitting. Remember, you want your knees angled down. You want it at least a 90-degree angle, but down an angle 95 degrees or so is even better, because you don't want your knees getting in the way of your arms when you're bowing. What else? Yeah, I think that just about covers everything about just sitting and setting up with the cello. I hope that this is useful.